thank you for that, and thank you, Tom, and all of you for an extraordinarily mind-expanding day. It's 2:30 in the afternoon, so I'm going to ask you to all do me a favor right now. Please stand up. Get out of your seat. Good. Thank you. Because I want to make sure everybody's awake and listening to this. You can sit down now. Just checking. I want to make sure everybody's awake and listening to this next panel, because you're going to want to hear what they have to say. I've been a journalist covering business for more than 4 decades now. And I can honestly say I've never seen anything like the last 16 months. You have this technology, generative AI, that the vast majority of people in the C-suites and the boardrooms of corporate America and the world had never heard of before, just 16 months ago. And within a few months, they were all being told, oh, this is going to disrupt your business. This is an existential moment. If you don't get on top of this, you may cease to exist. And so what we want to explore in the next 45 minutes is, how much of that is true? How much of it is hype? Is there a Valkison's duck in there somewhere, or a mechanical Turk? How is this going to change corporations? How is it going to change society? How is it going to change the world? And fortunately, we have a great group of people who come at this from different perspectives to discuss that with. You've already heard from a couple of members of C3's board. You heard from Condi Rice just a minute ago. You heard from Jim Snabe before lunch. Now I want to invite 5 more members of the C3 board to the stage to continue that discussion. Please, why don't you all come up, and I'll introduce you once you get up here. I know you're in the dark. There's some, yes. I'll tell you, as they're walking up and taking their seats, Lisa Davis is the former CEO of Siemens, is on the board of Air Products, Penske. Who am I missing?
That's good.
Good. And so, has a great seat to see how this is transforming industrial corporations. Rick Levin is the former president of Yale University, the former CEO of Coursera, so has a view of education and the role this is going to play there. Mike McCaffrey is chairman of McKenna Capital, but perhaps more importantly for this conversation, he's on the board of NVIDIA. And I think pretty much everybody sitting out there would like to know how you pulled that off. They would trade seats with you in a minute at this point. Bruce Sewell is the former general counsel of Apple. And K.R. Sridhar is the founder and CEO of Bloom Energy, which is a transformational energy company. So it's a perfect group to look at this amazing phenomena from different levels. And Mike, since NVIDIA is kind of the epicenter of enthusiasm about this wave of technology, I think I'll start with you. I mean, how much of it is real? If you look at the stock price of that company, you'd have to think something very, very, very big is going on in the world.
So can I start by congratulating anybody who bought it 18 months ago? You're up 7 to 8 times.
Show of hands, please. There, you got a couple.
You're up 7 to 8 times, which even by Sand Hill Road standards, venture capital standards, is a healthy return. I guess I'd make 2 observations, Alan, to respond. One is that I think we're at the very early innings of this transition, and by that transition I mean this juncture of generative AI, large language model development, and what we haven't talked much about, which is accelerated computing, which is at the heart of what NVIDIA does. So NVIDIA makes GPUs. Those are graphics processing units. It's 30-year-old technology that was developed to process video. And over the course of the last 30 years, it has been evolved and perfected. And we now end up in a sweet spot of being, by far, the best way to process, compute generative AI and large language models. That's called accelerated computing. That's called data centers. We sell our GPUs into data centers. The street characterizes us as a chip company. That's a misnomer. These are the size of a file cabinet. They look like servers. They weigh 70 pounds. Yes, the H100 that Professor Manning talked about is at the middle of all this. But the scale of, so the first answer to your question is if we're real. The people who, the hyperscalers, the people who are in the business of providing this kind of cloud-based computing power absolutely think it's for real.
Lisa, the boards you sit on, how are they viewing this? Do they see it as transformational or potentially even existential for the companies?
You know, for the boards I sit on, which are largely industrial companies, and then also kind of my experience, which is large industrial companies, I think in general the view is that this is a means to really revolutionize industry. So there's certainly a degree of caution because it does introduce so much change to typically very established companies, but it's also seen as a huge opportunity. And it's really seen as a huge opportunity in many of the ways that have been discussed here with customer examples and what the C3 team has been presenting all morning. But it's in the way of, you know, creating capability in the organization largely through analytics, whether it be predictive maintenance, whether it be leveraging the fast data processing capacity, the comprehensive nature of that, to develop even better solutions for repair scope or better solutions for optimization actions and such. So it's really about creating capability in the organization in one part. Secondly, around creating efficiency. We hear a lot about the chatbots and the virtual assistants and how they can assist in customer service. I work with one of the companies I work with, has a very large, over 400,000 truck fleet. And they leverage today AI in their leasing office, in the interface they have with customers, to make it a much more seamless interface, to make it much more personalized. And it's driven a huge improvement in just the customer response and the satisfaction of customers through that simple activity of just efficiency and driving an improved customer service relationship. And then the third area, which I see a lot in the boardroom, is really around kind of decision making, and with that, risk management. Because for at least what I've seen in my career and in the different boards, is that, you know, every decision is really a balance of risk and reward. And a lot of the companies are looking at how do we leverage AI to improve, you know, just being more informed about how to make decisions. Having so much more data processed, having a much more comprehensive view, having that view be much more real time to where impending issues are identified, which then gives you a view as to what the risk of those decisions are and how to act more quickly. All of this is creating an environment which is much easier to do business in, and it's just at the infancy. One of the other companies I do business with is a very large project company. They have over 20 billion in capital projects underway around the world, and they're leveraging AI today to learn what's happened in projects real time so that they can incorporate those learnings into bidding on projects, into the execution on projects, and into managing the risk on projects. So it really has enabled, just again, at the very beginning, a lot of improvement in capability, efficiency, and how companies are making decisions. And a lot of that comes to the board, because the board is looking at the decision-making processes, how risk is managed, et cetera. And so it has become real time, and I think it's got a huge, so much more to go in terms of potential.
I want to come back to risks in a minute, but I've seen some survey data that suggests that something like 85, I may not have these numbers exactly right, but something like 85% of CEOs understand this technology is going to completely transform their company. But at the same time, only about 30% of them believe they have the capabilities they need to make that transformation. I see you nodding, Bruce. Does that fit with what you're hearing?
I think that's very, very true. And I think additionally, the CEOs would say that they probably don't feel that they have even 30% of the board knowledge of directors that are actually familiar with this technology. The question, whether this is real, it is certainly real in the sense that it's arrived. And the base case, the positive case for endorsing and embedding IA into the enterprise, I think has been made very clearly. At the same time, there's the sense that it is not only transformative from a business perspective, but it can be transformative for the social fabric of the enterprise. How people that are not used to technology, how people who are used to doing their jobs in a particular way are going to react either positively or negatively to this. The consequence of that is that we often talk about the need to make a tops-down decision if you're going to employ AI in the enterprise. Mm-hmm. By that we mean it's going to come more from the CEO or the C-suite than it is likely to come from the grassroots of the company. And the influencers on the C-suite are often the board. So the board, I think, is in a particularly important position now, and it has owes a duty to the enterprise to make itself familiar with AI, to be able to talk to the CEO and the executive team in a meaningful way, and to make the case, almost and sometimes demand, that the executive team move forward with that. So it's clearly something that boards are very focused on.
Yeah, Rick.
I just want to jump in on this because I think it's important we all understand, and this group of course understands, that generative AI, what's happened in the last 16 months, isn't all of AI. And in fact, it's just a new wrinkle in AI that has captured the popular imagination. Tom Siebel's been talking about digital transformation of your companies for 15 years. And many of you have been with us for a long time doing various kinds of, shall we say, computational AI, which involves, predictive modeling using the tools of machine learning, neural networks, and so forth. Now, all of a sudden, everybody is aware of AI because generative AI is just so compelling, because it's an interface. It changes the entire user experience with AI because it's a natural language interface that anybody can play with. I think it isn't generative AI alone that's going to change the world. It's all of AI that's going to change the world.
But it has changed the way everybody thinks about it and the way the markets think about it.
That's the point. It's gotten everybody super aware of what's going on.
AR.
Yeah.
So, look, I think, is AI the opportunity? It's as obvious as light of day. I think Jim Snaby talked about, if you're a business leader, what a lucky time to be a business leader where you can make the impact. It's a complete convergence of so many things happening. Let's talk about it for a second, right? It's the first time in human history brick and mortar is getting connected to digital. The ubiquitousness of sensors, that you can just distribute them to the cheapest of things and monitor them real time. The fact that that sensor can be connected wirelessly at the real-time speeds, they never existed. And when you put all that together and you have a business model transformation where ultimately the total serviced cost is what the customer cares about, and you as a provider of that equipment, if you optimize the service cost, are going to reap the benefits both for humanity as well as for yourself. When you can do good and make good, you put all these things together, there cannot be a question of, is this an opportunity? Yeah. It can be a question of all the other questions, esoteric questions we ask about, is it going to reach human intelligence? Is it going to have consciousness? That's for somebody else to deal with. But for the business leaders out here, it's a phenomenal opportunity.
KR, can you talk a little bit about how this great transformation, which would be enough by itself, ties in with the transformation that you're spending your days on, the energy transformation?
Sure. So, look, everything is getting digitized, everything is becoming digital, everything is getting connected. The physical world and the software world, the hardware world and the software world are getting connected. Digital runs on electricity, period. So the numbers that you gave, Mike, let me translate that in power. So last quarter, NVIDIA announced 500,000 GPUs. 300,000 were purchased by 2 hyperscalers. 1 GPU is the equivalent of 1 home use of electricity. So you just added 300,000 homes just for those 2 hyperscalers. 1.5 kilowatt, fully optimized for redundancy, backup, all that stuff, okay? This year alone, for NVIDIA's numbers to get to where it needs to go, you're talking roughly 2 gigawatts of power. 60% of world's data centers are located in the US. Yeah. NVIDIA alone, not anybody else, just those chips, okay? It is additional power needed. 60% of data centers, especially AI data centers, it's a fair bet that it's going to be in the US. And 80% of that 60%, which is roughly 50% of the world's data center needs, are going to be in 2 geographies, Virginia and Silicon Valley. 2 gigawatts.
Yeah, I don't think that's...
The utility industry doesn't move at that speed.
It's mind-blowing. I'm glad you raised that, because I don't think that's well understood. Implicit in those NVIDIA numbers, Mike, is a future where there is massive increase in demand for power to power compute, and we don't know where that's going to come from.
There's no plan for that. There's no plan for it. I mean, KR's got a plan for it, but you're the only one I know. Let me just say, I feel like, it's the first time I felt like I played in the NBA, because I went off stage, they patched me up, and I'm back in the game. You see that all the time. No, I think it's something we struggle with. Now, just to correct one thing, I think Professor Manning talked about this also in terms of the amount of power consumed by a GPU. Still, if you're going to go about generative AI and large language model development, it's 10 to 20 times more efficient than using anything else, a CPU, a TPU, any other processor out there. So you're saving energy at the end of the day if that's the job you're doing. But there's nobody that has an answer to this. And I do feel like I do feel like it's going to be the most constraining factor to the growth of generative AI.
Yeah, Lisa, you've worked in power systems your whole career. Yeah.
Well, just to add to KR's point, I think it's even bigger than it sounds like on the surface. Because if you look at utility systems in general, or power utility companies, over the last 2 decades, they've really not had to deal with managing growth. Because there hasn't been a lot of growth, especially in the US, in electricity consumption, electricity demand. Because all the growth in the economy, et cetera, has been offset by efficiency savings. So it's been a fairly stable system. That's over the last 2 decades. So now all of a sudden we see 6% increase in electricity demand, potentially even more than that, as data centers and industrial facilities start being added, because you've got now all of the infrastructure spending by the government and the IRA and everything. All of that's adding industrial spend to the US, which requires power as well. So now I've recently seen data that said there's an expectation that there's going to be, over the course of the next 6 to 8 years, 38 gigawatts of power required for data centers and industrial complexes. And then you add to that also that there's about 50 plus gigawatts of power in the US that have to be retired, former fossil facilities and nuclear facilities that are at their life or require enhancements for new codes, and the spend is too great. So there's quite an upcoming imbalance between supply and demand in electricity overall.
I just want to add one dimension to this, which KR focused on the hyperscale part of the market. Within a decade, most big enterprises are going to go back on-prem with some part of their data center needs. It's just too critical. The latency issues with respect to having data centers at a distance, the critical nature of cybersecurity around enterprise data, et cetera, it's going to force people, and you're already seeing it, to take some portion of that and put it on-prem. It's just another dimension of the growth you're going to see.
And how are we going to meet that?
I think there is a business model change, okay? Look, the utility industry was created, and US with the rural electrification project, everything, it was a public good. If large hyperscalers are going to need such large amounts of power that compete with almost small cities, it's time for a private compact between that hyperscaler and a provider of power. Yeah. Is that a regulated utility? I don't know. Yeah. I would beg to differ, but that's, we have utilities out here. It can be any of those models, okay? But at the end of the day, the public good cannot be funding this kind of a program. So you need captive power being generated and the right kind of digital power being generated for these data centers, because the mechanical age infrastructure, which is what the grid was created for, should not be supporting the most modern of digital infrastructure.
Yeah. Rick, I want to talk some about education, and education in the very broadest sense. It seems to me that there are at least three really big issues here. One is very exciting, the possibility that this technology and generative AI can provide tutors, can power educators to help people learn more. One is the challenge of educating people to take advantage of this technology, but then the other is just the ability of generative AI to pollute the information ecosystem. You see it happening already, to put bad information out there in more and more places. And how do we prepare people to live in a world when they see something or hear something, to have some way of evaluating whether it has any truth to it or it's just something that was made up?
Okay, three questions.
Three big questions, and you have like a minute and a half.
Yeah. The first two are opportunities. The third is some kind of threat or challenge. The education sector is responding very rapidly, actually, to the first and second challenge or opportunity. That is, in terms of training at Coursera and other ed tech providers that can produce content very quickly and get it to large numbers of people very quickly, unlike the university system, which takes a much longer time to operate. But it's already happening. Coursera produced over 200 new courses on generative AI in the last 12 months. And these are from top universities, they're from leading companies and experts. And they're training people at all levels. Just from the average user who's a recreational user of ChatGPT, there's courses on how to write prompts correctly or best. And
I took one. I took the Andrew Ng course. Yeah. I think in my mind it was titled The Idiot's Guide to Generative AI, but he had a nicer name for it.
But all the way up the value chain to actually building AI models and the frontiers of large language models. So the sector's responding very quickly, and of course, it's been a good business for us, business opportunity. Not quite NVIDIA growth rates, but we're doing okay. I think, and down the road, the university system will adapt and remember everything we've got now in AI came out of universities originally, and so there will be advanced training continuing in universities as well. So that's one challenge, one opportunity. The other is using the tool as educators. How can we use AI to educate more effectively? And here, the online providers are pretty much all trying to develop, as we speak, tools that make learning more effective. Most of the online course providers have had, for some time now, various kinds of chat boxes that you can ask questions to, but they weren't anywhere near as effective as modifying the LLMs that are out there, GPT-4 and some of the more advanced ones, and then using them to help guide learners through the work. It's quite amazing, actually, what you can do, particularly if you make these models ingest all the data in your courses, because similar to what C3 is doing, then you can be relied upon not to have hallucination. You get ground truth, you get attribution. If you ask a question taking a course on Coursera today to Coursera Coach, it will tell you where you can find the answer to that question, in what course, in whose lecture, what reading, and so forth, and label it all for you. So that's a tremendous educational advance. We're using AI, large language models, to help build courses as well for authors. So all that's great. Now to the hard question. And I don't know the answer. That is, I think how do we stop the proliferation of bad information and of misinformation? It sort of gets to what Condi was talking about a while ago. I mean, it opens the question of what is the locus of regulation and what does it look like? I mean, so far, we've pretty much relied on the companies to police their own, the social networks and so forth have started to police their own content to a certain degree. And I think there's been some significant reduction of, misinformation. But it's very challenging. I mean, I think that responsible companies, I think, will all be concerned about, just because they need to protect their own reputations, that they will want to put out accurate information and not want to be, come under attack for misinforming the public. But it's the rogue actors that are really the problem, right? It's not.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's somehow we're going to have to teach people to be better consumers of information, to spot the signs, maybe give them some tools to help them spot the signs.
There are going to be some tools like watermarking and other ways to identify legitimate content, I think. Yeah.
Bruce, there have been a number of references during the course of the day to the intellectual property challenge. You don't really know what's going into these large language models, and so you don't know whose intellectual property you're abusing when you put out the result. And we have the suit that gets lots of attention between the New York Times and ChatGPT. Where do you think that's going to end up? I mean, we have to solve the law on this at some point.
Yeah, although waiting to solve the law is not a particularly good use of your time. I mean, the law moves very, very slowly, and we're in an environment where the technology is moving much more quickly. There's certainly a lot of chatter about this, forgive the pun, but there's a lot of this stuff that's sort of floating around in the ethos, whether it's New York Times, whether it's Getty Images. There is a lot of stuff that needs to be still sorted out. I think Tom did a really good job this morning, though, of making a delineation between the stuff that is in flux and the stuff that is yet to be sorted out versus the things that we've been doing for the last 10 years. The core enterprise activity, which most of the people in this room are probably much more interested in than ultimately whether a photograph of some famous artist is copied or not copied and whether it's a derivative work. So in one sense, I'm not too worried about this. I don't think that it's likely to impede, or as Tom said again, very correctly, I don't think it changes the risk profile. The law is going to sort out ultimately where this kind of more social use of AI, this more consumer-based use of AI, where the lines will be drawn. But I think from a core enterprise standpoint, I don't think it's something that we really need to worry about. That said, there's a direct correlation between the point at which society shines a spotlight on an issue, whether it be privacy or climate change or now topically AI. The point at which that happens and the speed with which government agencies, regulators, courts, activist shareholders all get interested in this and begin to create a lot of noise and heat around this. And I think that's where we are right now, which is another indication of why the board has to pay attention. Because for those of you who maybe read this, but Apple just got a shareholder proposal last week that the company be required to not only disclose all of its intentions and uses of AI, but also to publish a report on that investigation inside the company, and it garnered 40% of the shareholder share, which is not enough to force the company to adopt that proposal, but it's a very meaningful, 40% is a lot for a shareholder proposal. So we're seeing more and more of this come up. We're seeing rating agencies indicate that companies will be dinged if they don't have AI reports in their Form 10Ks and 8Ks. We have the SEC now requiring a certain kind of template for disclosure in these public documents. So there is going to be some overhead to complying with these things. But in terms of the liability or the way in which the IP is going to get sorted out, I don't think it's going to be dispositive.
Yeah. What else do companies and boards need to be thinking about? What are we missing here? Lisa, you talked about risk management. What are the things that people need to keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, you could talk about risk a lot, but I think what I see in the different companies is, every business decision you make in your businesses today, or what I've seen in the past, is, like I said, a balance of risk and reward. Risk is not new to business. And I believe if you look at the different potential risks with AI, whether it be around compliance with regulation, whether it be around social responsibility, how do you set it up within your company to ensure you have the proper controls, all of that is manageable. And so to me, it's really about how do you take advantage of a significant opportunity that will allow you to differentiate yourselves in the market while keeping in mind the risk that you have in the business and mitigating that risk as you do other risks around new technology or new processes or whatever the case is. So that's kind of what I've seen from the different boards that I've been in. It's not about avoiding risk, it's about how do you manage it, how do you understand it, and how do you manage it, and it's very manageable.
For any complex business that has so much scale, having that predictive optimization for what to do now, being able to get what-if scenarios done in a matter of minutes and hours rather than days, and knowing the 4 things that you can bring your subject matter experts to. So I agree with this. This is a tool, and it doesn't replace a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
But that opportunity, I think, is really a competitive advantage. So it's either an opportunity or you're going to suffer because your competition is.
Yeah, so let's stick with that. I'd like for you each, everybody in this room is wrestling with these issues. Everybody at every company that I've talked to for the last 14 months is wrestling with this. How do I take advantage of the big opportunities and not get caught in the pitfalls or the hype or the risks? I'd love for each of you to give your best advice to the people in this group on how to move forward, because it's pretty clear to me from the conversations I'm having and the polling data I'm looking at that people are a little confused or just unsure of how to begin to take advantage of this opportunity in a safe way. And Mike, if you want to go.
No, I don't mind starting. Look, I've been fascinated today. I've spent time in meetings with people who are professional property tax assessors. This is a perfect example. Pick an application that solves a particular problem, something that you know well, get your hands around it, get used to the technology, and let it prove its value to you. Right? I don't think it's necessary. We do talk about digital transformation of the enterprise. I think it's, in the early days of this, pick something, some mission critical application and get it done and get experience using the technology.
And do it. Rick.
I think that's just exactly right. And I don't think you need to be, if you're talking about using the C3 products, you don't need to be worried about the LLMs doing anything terrible to you, because we really have trained them in an appropriate way so that your data will be secure, there won't be hallucination, you'll get true answers, you'll get sources of data, it will be reliable, and I completely agree with Mike's idea that take a problem and solve it. That's and then once you've seen how well it works, then think about what's next.
That's huge, by the way. If C3 has solved those issues, if you don't have to worry about the data and the IP and the hallucinations, that's a huge part of the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Lisa.
I'll just add one aspect to what Mike and Rick already said about finding a problem and solving the problem. What I also see with companies is in order to really make that value that's created by solving the problem sustainable and repeatable, you have to also make sure that you're taking that solution and building it into the organization. So how do you make it part of your processes going forward so that it's repeatable and it becomes a part of the way you do business and not just a bit of a one-off project? That's the step I think we need to focus on as well.
You really have to integrate the technology into the people and processes. Yep. KR.
So I can give an example of what we do at C3, and we just started this pilot, okay? So every fuel cell stack that we build, that's 0.5 kilowatt. So we have 2 million of these in our gigawatt. We didn't call it digital twins back then, but that's what they are. We have digital twins sending us data. The fact that we can use the tools that they have right now to potentially extend the life of these things can give you 10s and 20% of cost savings in your service for your customer, for you, right? So here, why do we not have to worry about getting it wrong? Because C3 is going to provide the reference and what data it used to give us the recommendations. Our subject matter experts can quickly verify that. So you're actually getting the benefit without having to take blind risks like the ChatGPT and Jim Snabe and his son getting interchanged.
Yep. Bruce, final word. It has to be good. You have to bring us home.
Bring us home.
The pressure is on.
Okay, so I think first embrace the notion that this is inevitable. Your competitive future, your competitive, the way that you can keep your company active demands this. So it's not an optional issue. Given that it's not optional, then take the time to make the right choice. And by that I mean get to understand the architecture of the platforms that will be presented to you. And as we heard this morning, and I completely endorse this, the notion that you can have an architecture which is going to solve a lot of these problems inherently because the way the system was designed is a huge benefit. It's a huge leap forward when you start to try to implement this in the first time. And as a CEO or an executive team member, as you're explaining it to your board, to be able to say, no, we're going to check here for IP risk, check here for privacy risks. We've thought of that, we've architected, the system is architected, the one that we're endorsing, and that's what I would do. So, yeah, choose carefully.
Alan, just before you wrap up, I've watched you moderate many panels in the past, and I've always admired your hard-hitting questions, but never before have I seen you actually draw blood.
I apologize for that. But I was impressed by how quickly you got back into the battle. So thank you all. And thank you all for a great conversation. It was really, really enlightening. Thanks.
Thanks. That was good. Good finish.